symptom is hate. Its symptom is anger. Its symptom is rage.
It won't come as any surprise to anyone who has followed this channel for any length of time that dystopian worlds are absolutely my bag. One of my other major interests in life than films is reading books, especially fiction. So when I saw Fahrenheit 451 in the bookstore, I of course bought it, having heard for many years that it is one of the great dystopian novels of the 20th century. Now, the best dystopias have a real substance to them, one you can believe in actually existing, one that you could envisage yourself being a part of, one that takes something from the real world and builds a dystopian vision around it. Now imagine my disappointment when I started to read Fahrenheit 451 to discover the dystopian world building here essentially comes off as an old upper middle class Christian intellectual ranting at the working class, the youths, and those newfangled things they seem to enjoy called televisions. It's what I probably sound like when I start a rant about how awful and mind-numbing I find TikTok or some other such modern form of entertainment when kids ask me if I use them. Not much about the world in Fahrenheit 451 as written feels like it could ever exist. In fact, I'd go as far as to argue nothing about this dystopia really makes much sense. If this is a masterpiece of 20th century literature, no wonder people stop reading books. I just nearly knocked the lamp off. It wasn't long into the novel that I realised they have seen this narrative and world fleshed out way more effectively than it is here, ironically on a television, more to the point via DVD and the film Equilibrium, which is a 2002 American science fiction action film directed by Kurt Wimmer. It isn't even the greatest of films according to critics. They are wrong. Shocking, I know. It currently holds a whopping 41% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. It's also undeniably a shameless rip-off of Bradbury's novel, but it paints a far more believable dystopian world in a few key categories for me. Those being, what turned the world dystopian, the world as a dystopia, and the inciting incident that causes our protagonist to rebel. I'm fully willing to accept that I'm just really dumb and the point of the book went right over my head, but hear me out and let me know what you think down in the comments below. Let's take those categories one by one to explain exactly what I mean. The world turned dystopian in Fahrenheit 451 because people stopped reading books and started watching TV. Then the government used that as an excuse to censor literature, and only literature, as far as I can tell. Art and other creative endeavours seem to be untouched. They just came for the books, which people had already voluntarily stopped reading anyway in this world. This alone caused people to become unthinking, largely emotionless zombies. Which makes no real sense personally, because even today in 2022, when within eyeshot I have a gaming PC, a PS4, over 400 TV channels and a smart TV, not to even mention the internet that has access to more content than could ever be consumed in a lifetime, all forms of entertainment unavailable to people in the 1950s, and still a majority of people read books. In fact, in 2014, the last year I can find any figures for this, 77% of Americans still read a book that year, a figure that hasn't changed hugely since the 90s. So the fact people voluntarily gave up reading books in favour of the stupefaction granted by TV to the point books were banned is just so unrealistic that the foundational tenet this world is built on makes no real logical sense. It could be argued that this is a fiction within the fiction. In reality, the government actually did censor all the books, but I don't think it really makes much difference, because it only gets worse when you think about the world as a dystopia and the effect this has had on the populace for more than a split second. But we will get to that in the next section of this video in a minute. First, let's take a look at what turned the world dystopian in Equilibrium, and why it makes a whole load more sense than it does here in Fahrenheit 451. The writers of Equilibrium clearly had similar issues with the book to me because they solve most if not all of my problems with the foundations Fahrenheit 451's world is built on. Libria is a totalitarian state created at the end of a nuclear World War III where the survivors decided that human civilization could ill afford a World War IV. So in an effort to banish war to the annals of time, they banned emotions and any object that stimulates them. On top of that, to get around pesky human nature, everyone in Libria is forced on pain of death as a sense offender to take a drug called Prosium 2 that regulates their ability to feel emotion. The dystopian world is controlled by a semi-religious order of clerics called the Tetragrammaton. These are essentially the firemen of Fahrenheit's world, people in charge of tracking down and destroying sense offenders and any object that has been deemed likely to cause emotion. This foundation makes way more sense in comparison because after surviving a nuclear war, some humans would probably wish to give up part of their humanity to just ensure survival and would enforce that wish upon the rest of society by force of violence. It also gets rid of the fact people are just compelled to create by society not willingly going along with this plan, with the threat of violence and forced mind control via mandatory drugs keeping them in line and preventing them just finding new creative outlets. It also makes a far more compelling dystopia to me because there is an obvious juxtaposition between its stated aims and its consequences. It wishes to eliminate suffering and war, it intentionally fights a war with much suffering against the only people in this world who are recognisably human. Which brings us to the effect this dystopia has on the people and the dystopian world it has built. Whilst reading the book, I did have the thought that it has some parallels to cancel culture, due to the fact that the only people who actually have the power to cancel someone or something are its audience. People who don't care and didn't care can't cancel you. Top-down government bans are almost always spectacularly ineffectual, so the only real way you can be cancelled is if everyone stops caring, including your audience. That being said, the amount of people and things this actually happens to is very small. This though is very obviously a retrospective, fairly loose parallel with something that is a newish phenomena. In the actual novel, I still don't think it makes much sense. Let's take the effect on people first. In the book, it's repeatedly brought up how people drive fast and commit suicide at alarming rates. The implication being they are so emotionally dead inside, they are trying to feel something by almost dying, or in fact actually dying, because they've stopped reading books and started watching TV. Humans don't suffer from emotions because they read books, they suffer from emotions because emotions are an intrinsic part of humanity. To the point being emotionless is seen as an extremely serious mental health issue. We also have a drive to be creative. Even the dullest of intellects have some form of creative outlet, be that artistic, performative or literary. People would be inspired to create other forms of artistic expression, which aren't seemingly banned in this world, which would mean they aren't emotionless, easily controlled and duped citizens. The fact they can also read and write in this universe still means people would almost certainly be writing stories and other such things down, because that's what humans do. We have an innate drive to do exactly that. All this world building does is reinforce my opinion that television is just something Ray Bradbury personally dislikes and is railing against because he's a classist snob. Rather than this being a well thought out biting satire of McCarthy era censorship, it gets even more clear when he uses poetry as the form of literature that means the most. It brings people to tears on more than one occasion. I think I'm safe in saying it is probably the form of literature that people use the least, especially the working class. He even then double underlines this classy snobbery by saying that comics are still allowed because nobody ever read one of those and caught intellectual thoughts as a result. It would be like me creating a dystopian world where all forms of knowledge and entertainment have to be conveyed in no more than 60-second videos via the form of interpretive dance, because TikTok exists. I really don't understand the appeal of TikTok, but it's not aimed at me, and people including Mrs. Cookin seem to really enjoy it, so who am I to disagree? Whichever angle, and the more I look at Fahrenheit 451's dystopian world, the more the whole edifice collapses into a poorly written rubble. Which is why I much prefer the world as built in Equilibrium, because as I alluded to previously, it goes against the very fabric of human nature. Very few normal, mentally healthy human beings willingly give up prized possessions or their ability to create and have independent thought. This world is a dystopia because humanity has shed one of the key facets of humanity, our ability to feel, and I'd probably argue create too, as those two things surely go hand in hand. A lot of human creativity comes from a well of emotion, one that Fahrenheit 451 never really did a great job of explaining why it was extinguished other than the stupefying ability of TV. That lack of humanity in this world is what makes it so dystopian, with people trudging mindlessly to and from monolithic fascist wet dream architecture, the kind that the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany could only dream of creating, whilst they listen to the same boring, repetitive and dull propaganda about how amazing their lives are and why Prosium and the Tetragrammaton are the root cause of this utopian ideal. I think it is for this reason that the only people whose faces we see clearly are the star performers. This is a film you have to show the stars' faces and the sense offenders. Everyone else are faceless masked goons, because those people are the only people that have a shred of actual humanity about them, and by making the goons faceless, it removes one of our big emotional connections to them. Christian Bale's character allegedly kills 118 people in this, with the violence starting out as fairly PG with no blood being visible, and by the end, huge gushes of blood spurting out with every shot that hits, and then Taye Diggs has his face sliced off. It has the effect of increasing the visceral emotional level of violence we as an audience experience, along with the protagonist. Had we been allowed to see their faces, we'd have been far more emotionally impacted by this amount of killing, that's for sure. All of this is underlined by the leader of the resistance when he says this:
If we can succeed in disrupting the supply for even one day, our cause will be won by human nature itself.
Exactly why Fahrenheit 451's dystopia never made sense to me. Which brings me to my final point about Fahrenheit 451's world building, the inciting incident that sets a protagonist down the path of rebellion. In the book, Montag talks to a 17-year-old girl who spouts a load of nonsense, and he somehow not 5 pages later has changed his entire worldview as a result. From being the ultimate instrument of this dystopian world, a fireman, to being an out-and-out poetry-spouting rebel because a 17-year-old told you to sniff the dew on the grass in a matter of days. It's ridiculous. Now, as someone who works with teenagers on an almost daily basis, I will admit occasionally they come out with something profound, but they definitely aren't the kind of people I'd change my entire worldview based on one conversation with. It is also a little bit too close for comfort to turning Montag into a bit of a Prince Andrew, if I'm being honest, the way some passages are written. Of course, his wife also maybe possibly attempts suicide, but she's so far down the dystopian TV rabbit hole that it's pretty obvious she's never coming back out, so it never struck me as a believable inciting incident either. In Equilibrium, they obviously come up with a way better solution than a jabbering teen to make the protagonist rebel, where it takes one conversation with a kooky teen in Fahrenheit 451 to make the ultimate instrument of state repression to flip to being entirely against the system he spent his entire life fighting for. In Equilibrium, it is a far more drawn-out affair. Firstly, we find out that John Preston's wife was in fact a sex offender, and that she was arrested and executed by the very state that John supports. He reacts emotionlessly. Later on he kills Sean Bean, his partner, who is also a sense offender, but you can see doubt is starting to creep in at this point. He then ends up missing a dose of Prosium 2 before going on a mission to arrest someone linked to Sean Bean, which is where he sees the face of real humanity for the first time in his entire life. After that, there is no going back for him, and he's a full-blown sense offender, fighting the very people he once stood shoulder to shoulder with. It is this slow, gradual build-up which makes the flip so much more believable. We see his almost emotionless reactions to his wife's death, and via the other events, his increasingly emotional state until eventually he's risking his life for a puppy. And who wouldn't do that? It's just a far more believable set of events that send him down the path of rebellion, especially in this dystopian world. Admittedly, they ruin it by having it all be the nefarious plan of the antagonist all along, even though it would be almost impossible for him to actually set this chain of events in motion. That is just bad writing. Well, this turned into more of a video about dystopian world building, I guess, rather than a review of Equilibrium, which is a film I've enjoyed for years as a bit of cheesy action schlock. There's an interesting dystopian world, and Gun Carter, which is entirely ridiculous and unrealistic. You'd be dead within seconds trying to use it, but you know the rule of cool, so it gets a pass because it's awesome, unlike Fahrenheit 451's dystopian world, which just sucks, so doesn't. I'm a hypocrite, sue me. If you like that, then don't forget to like the video, comment and subscribe to the channel, because next week I'll be back with She, a film that makes zero sense, but is entertaining as all hell.